The storm came in hard, the kind that tears through a place like it holds a grudge. The wind roared across the treetops like it had something to prove, tearing leaves from branches, hurling them sideways through the dusk. Rain slashed against the windshield, thick and blinding, and somewhere in the distance, through the black wall of trees, a child's voice echoed. Faint, startled, then gone. It was the last sound anyone remembered. Thomas Whitaker had taken his son Ethan out to the lake early that morning, a quick trip before the cold closed in for the season, he told his wife. Just the two of them, some sandwiches, fishing poles, and the promise of silence. It was something they did every year since Ethan was 5. They left in his red pickup just after dawn. Thomas kissed Nancy on the cheek. Ethan waved from the passenger seat with a juice box in one hand and his favorite blue raincoat on his lap. That was November 11th, 2015. The following morning, their truck was found parked neatly near the tree line beside Lake Iskall. Doors locked, keys still in the ignition. Inside were 2 soda cans, an uneaten sandwich, Ethan's raincoat folded over the back seat, and a dog-eared comic book with a peanut butter smudge on page 9. Outside, muddy boot prints led into the woods, 1 adult, 1 child, and then vanished. The search began within hours. Locals formed lines and walked shoulder to shoulder into the forest. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Dogs barked and pulled at leashes, but the forest held its secrets tight. For 7 days they looked. On the 8th, the wind changed, snow dusted the ground, and the sheriff called it. Thomas and Ethan Whitaker had vanished. No signs of foul play, no bodies, no answers. Just for a long time after, the forest remained untouched. People avoided the trailhead. Even in summer, when the lake glistened like glass and the trees smelled like pine and memory, no one wanted to walk where they'd walked. It became one of those stories, the ones kids whispered at sleepovers and fishermen nodded about at bars. A mystery sealed beneath suns. A decade passed. The land, it seemed, forgot. But on a cold April morning in 2025, during a routine land survey for a logging project, a man named Caleb Warren stepped off a back trail to relieve himself and noticed something strange. A shape that didn't belong, part of a roof, maybe, or a wall, half hidden behind a curtain of ivy and rot. Curious, he brushed back the foliage. Beneath the moss and dirt was old wood, warped and gray, the edge of a structure. He pulled harder. Ivy snapped under his gloves. A cabin. Smaller than a shed, barely wide enough for 2 grown men to lie down inside it. No door, just an open rectangle where the darkness sat still. Caleb hesitated. Then he stepped in. The air was damp, musty. It clung to his skin. The kind of smell that hinted at long-kept secrets. Mold, dust, something faintly metallic. His boots creaked over the floorboards. One corner of the room had collapsed inward, revealing patches of wet earth. A rusted bed frame leaned against the back wall. A cracked bowl, a pile of shredded newspaper, and beside it a thin strip of color beneath the grime. He bent down. It was a child's drawing. A sun, bright yellow, unevenly shaded, 2 stick figures holding hands, one bigger than the other. Their heads had simples. Above them, in red crayon, the word Dad was scrawled and circled. Behind him, something else. On the far wall, barely legible in the dim light, someone had etched words into the wood with the tip of something sharp. One phrase written over and over in uneven, increasingly desperate strokes. Dad will come back. Dad will come back. Underneath it, in the dirt, lay a small blue bracelet. The plastic beads had, and the elastic was fraying at the ends, but the letters still spelled it out. ETHAN. Caleb stumbled back, nearly falling through the doorway. He clutched the bracelet in one hand and fumbled for his phone with the other, but he couldn't unlock it. His fingers were trembling. For the rest of the day, he wouldn't be able to explain why he cried. He wasn't a father. He wasn't even from Ironwood, but something in that cabin had broken through him like a crack in a windshield, sudden, spreading, impossible to ignore. Sarah Whitaker was just finishing her third cup of coffee when the sheriff's office called. She didn't recognize the number. For a moment, she debated letting it ring. That's what she did now. 10 years of wrong numbers, fake sightings, and anonymous voicemails had trained her to expect cruelty on the other end of a line. But her hand moved on instinct. She answered. The voice on the other end was cautious, careful with its words, like someone defusing a bomb. "Ms. Whitaker, this is Deputy Ellie Porter, Ironwood County. We believe we may have found something related to your brother and nephew." The room went quiet around her. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the muffled bark of a neighbor's dog. All of it fell away. She lowered herself to the kitchen floor before she even realized her legs had given out. The phone trembled against her ear. Her coffee spilled beside her. She didn't notice. "Can you come in?" The next sound was a name she hadn't said aloud in years. Ethan. At that night, Sarah packed a small suitcase with shaking hands. A sweater, old photographs, a notepad. Her fingers stopped on the last item, a folded map, hand-drawn, marked with every search route her family had ever walked. She unfolded it on the bed, looked at the fading ink, and traced her finger toward the north edge of the lake. The side they never searched, the side no one ever thought to search. The wind picked up outside. Tree branches scraped gently against the window. Somewhere in the distance, thunder growled, and then once again, the forest began to call. Sarah Whitaker had grown used to silence, not the comfortable kind that sits between friends or settles after laughter. This was the other kind, the kind that spreads like fog inside your chest, seeps into the cracks of your voice, and stays there. Over the last 10 years, she had become a master at shrinking herself, in conversation, in spaces, in hope. The silence had taught her to stop expecting answers. She lived alone in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of Ironwood. It had white siding that peeled in the winter, a rusting mailbox that tilted left, and wind chimes that made a soft metallic rattle when the wind blew just right. She didn't mind the way it aged. She had stopped fixing things around the same time she stopped believing Thomas and Ethan would walk through the front door again. Every morning she rose at 6:05. Not 6, course, never exactly. Something about the 5 minutes made it feel less mechanical. Coffee, 2 slices of toast, local news playing quietly in the background. Her mornings were like soft rehearsal loops for a life that used to feel bigger. She liked things orderly. It made the rest easier. On school days, she walked to work, just 4 blocks away. She taught 3rd grade at Putty. The kids called her Miss Whitaker. She was patient, calm, always smiling with her lips but never quite with her eyes. Her colleagues admired her consistency, her ability to calm even the most restless child. Few of them knew her story. Fewer dared to ask. Those who did were met with a soft shake of the head or a quiet, "Some things don't have answers." Her students knew her as the teacher who always remembered birthdays, who gave extra stickers for effort rather than correctness, who asked questions that made them think instead of memorize. But after the last bell, when the children scattered into the arms of waiting parents, Sarah often stayed behind. Alone in the empty classroom, she'd trace the rim of her coffee mug and stare out the window at the oak tree where Ethan used to play before school started. Sometimes she imagined him there still, his laugh piercing through autumn leaves. The room next to hers at home remained untouched. Ethan's room, pale blue walls, superhero bedsheets, a shelf of plastic dinosaurs arranged exactly the way he had left them. Every month Sarah did carefully, avoiding even the slightest shift of objects. A ritual, she told her. But there were nights, many, too many, when she sat on the edge of that bed, tracing the faded line of a poster he had hung crookedly, wondering what his voice would sound like now. Her brother Thomas had been everything she wasn't: bold, impulsive, endlessly warm. He had a way of talking that made strangers trust him and a laugh that filled entire rooms. He was a single dad who worked 2 jobs, fixed his own plumbing, and still found time to teach Ethan how to skip stones at the lake. When he disappeared, he took more than just a child with him. He took the oxygen out of her world. Sarah had kept everything, boxes stacked neatly in her closet, each labeled in shaky handwriting: search reports, witness statements, newspaper clippings, maps. The biggest one was simply labeled E&T. Inside, it was Ethan's drawing of a 3-person stick family beneath a crooked sun. He had given it to her on his 7th birthday. "To Aunt Sarah, I love you." Sure, she'd read those 4 words so many times they were permanently etched into her brain. On the back of the drawing was a tiny fingerprint in jelly. Grape, his favorite. Once a week she would unfold the old trail maps, the original ones used by the search teams. She had made copies, marked paths in different colored pens, notes in the margins, places they had searched, places they hadn't. And one spot she had circled again and again in blue ink: the northern ridge behind Lake Iskall. Densely wooded, difficult access, deemed too dangerous by the sheriff's office in 2015. She used to stare at that spot for hours. On the Sunday before the call came, Sarah had a dream. She was in the woods, but not like she remembered. The trees glowed faintly, as if lit from within, and the ground was soft beneath her feet. She heard water running somewhere nearby and the distant melody of a music box. She followed the sound to a clearing where a small cabin sat, leaning slightly to the left. A thin line of smoke drifted from the chimney. Inside, someone whispered her name. When she reached for the door, she woke up gasping. Her hand was clenched tightly around the child-sized beaded necklace Ethan had made for her in 2nd grade. She tried to ignore the dream, but it clung to her. Smell of rain before it falls. 2 days later, her phone rang just after breakfast. A number she didn't recognize. Her hand hovered. She never answered unknown numbers. Years of false leads, prank calls, and well-meaning strangers who thought they saw a boy with Ethan's smile had taught her caution. But something, she didn't know what, moved her finger toward the green icon. The voice on the other end was soft, deliberate. "Miss Whitaker, this is Deputy Ellie Porter with the Ironwood County Sheriff's Office. We may have found something related to your family." Time didn't stop. It collapsed. She heard only fragments: cabin, woods, bracelet, child's name, Ethan. The next moment she knew she was on the floor, coffee spilled across her sweater, hand clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. Her heart was racing, her ears roared, her brain refused to put the pieces together. All she could see, over and over, was the last morning they were together. Ethan waving from the passenger seat. Thomas giving her that wink he always used when he wanted her to relax. "It's just a day on the lake, Sar." But the lake had taken more than just a day. Sarah didn't remember packing, only that at some point she was in the guest room, pulling out the old folder marked Lake Iskall. Inside it were all the things the search teams had ignored, the gaps, the unofficial statements. A copy of the topographical map she had redrawn by hand after the official efforts stopped. She unfolded it slowly, tracing her fingers across familiar trails, winding lines and ridges. And there it was again, that spot, the place no one had dared to go. A tight crease in the forest's body, the place her dream had pointed to. That night she called her mother. Nancy answered on the 3rd ring. "Is it about them?" she asked. Sarah said nothing. "I had a dream." Ethan was wearing his blue shirt, the one with the rocket ship. He said not to be scared. She hadn't told anyone about her own dream, about the cabin, about the voice that whispered her name. Ironwood was colder than she remembered. April here still wore the bones of winter, As she drove into town, every corner looked like a memory half-scrubbed. The diner where she once met Thomas for pancakes, the gas station where Ethan bought blue slushies, the hill that overlooked the lake, still and gray beneath an overcast sky. It hadn't changed, which somehow made it worse. At the station, Deputy Porter was waiting. She couldn't have been more than 30. Light freckles, hair pulled tight, eyes that held both compassion and restraint. She offered Sarah a seat. No small talk, just a plastic evidence bag laid carefully on the table. Inside was a bracelet, blue beads, yellow star in the center. Ethan. Sarah didn't cry right away. She stared. Her mind refused to make the connection. Then, slowly, her hand lifted to touch the plastic, and something inside her cracked open. Not the grief that had lived in her for years. This was something else. Recognition. For a split second she could smell him, peanut butter, grass, and that odd citrus shampoo he hated, but she loved. She blinked, and the room blurred. "I need to see the cabin," she said. Deputy Porter hesitated. "It's not officially cleared yet. Structural risk, wildlife. We're still assessing. I need to see it." Across the hallway, behind a glass pane, a man stood watching. His face was older, more worn, but she recognized him instantly. Walter Mendez, the original detective assigned to the case in 2015. His hands were in his pockets. He hadn't seen her since the third week of the search, after he stood in her doorway and said, "We've done everything." Now, a decade later, he nodded once. Not an apology, not forgiveness, something else. Permission, maybe. That night, Sarah stayed at a rundown motel. The heat clanged in the pipes and the lights buzzed faintly above the mirror. She didn't unpack. She spread the map across the bed instead, traced every known path, circled the ridge again. The bracelet lay beside her, lit by a weak desk lamp. It looked so small. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something she hadn't touched in years. A crumpled note Ethan had written the morning they left. "Good luck, Daddy. Come home soon." She stared at it, then folded it once, then again. Slipped it into the inside pocket of Thomas's old jacket, the same one she now wore, a faded green canvas coat with a tear near the elbow and the smell of pine deep in its fire. Outside, the wind picked up. Branches tapped the window. Somewhere in the woods, something. Sarah stood slowly, put on the jacket, laced her boots, pocketed the map. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just stepped into the night, into the wind, and began walking toward the only place that still held questions. Behind her, the motel lights flickered once, then steadied. Ahead, the forest opened its arms. Sarah returns to the forest. Signs begin to surface. The forest was colder than she remembered. 10 years had changed many things. Not the way the trees seemed to lean together above the trail, their branches whispering secrets too old for language. Sarah stepped carefully over roots and patches of frozen mud, her boots pressing softly into the leaf-littered earth. Her breath came out in clouds. The wind carried the sound of distant branches cracking like bones bending the wrong way. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She hadn't needed to. When she opened the door to her motel room and saw the sky still dim with early morning, she knew she wouldn't be able to wait. The forest had always held the answers. And now, for the first time, it seemed willing to speak. Her backpack was light, just the essentials: a flashlight, water, the map, a copy of Ethan's drawing folded into her coat pocket like a talisman. As she moved deeper into the woods, the path narrowed, bending in ways that didn't match the official trail map. Felt like she was walking along a memory she never. The place the cabin had been found was off any marked path, buried in a tangle of trees and no cell signal. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been here. Sarah stopped at a fallen log, wiped her hands on her coat, and unfolded the map once more. Her finger traced the ridgeline, the narrow drop toward the ravine. This was the gap, the void on the search team's plan, the place they had skipped because the terrain was unsuitable, and yet that's where it had always been hiding. She walked for hours. Once she paused by a tree with initials carved into the bark, fresh enough to be less than a year old. Not Thomas's, not Ethan's. Still, something about it made her pause. The letters J-P-A-U-S-E-R in a crude heart. She took a photo with her phone and kept walking. Further in, the light changed. The sun filtered through the canopy, cast long slats of gold and shadow across the forest floor. That's when she saw it, off to the left. Not a structure, not yet. Something unnatural, like a piece of the forest had folded inward. She approached slowly, heart pounding in her ears. The trees parted slightly. And there it was, again, the cabin. Smaller than she'd imagined, slanted, decomposing. Its walls sagged inward like lungs mid-collapse. The doorway gaped open like a missing tooth. The roof had partly caved in, exposing the ribcage of beams beneath. She took one step closer, and then she heard it. Not loud, not sharp, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Crunching, stopping, watching. Sarah froze. For a full 10 seconds, nothing moved, no wind, no birds, just the silence pressing in. Then, from behind a tree, a voice. "Didn't think you'd come out here alone." She turned sharply, heart ready to burst. Walter Mendez stepped into the clearing, hands raised slightly. "Jesus," she muttered, exhaling hard. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to scare you." She glared. "Then don't sneak up on people in the woods." "I wasn't sneaking," he replied. "I was following." They stared at each other. The last time they'd been this close, her world had been collapsing. Now, it was creaking open again, just enough to make the pain worse. "I got here an hour ago," he said. "Didn't want to call it in until I was sure it was something." She looked past him toward the cabin. "Have you gone in?" He hesitated. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because it doesn't feel right, like something's waiting." Sarah didn't wait. She moved past him, boots crunching over frost, and stepped through the threshold. The smell was immediate, mold, rot, and something bitter underneath. The air was thick with age and dust. Sunlight pierced through a hole in the roof, illuminating the center of the room. There was a rusted bed frame in the corner, a blanket that had turned stiff and on the far wall. "Oh, my God!" Mendez stepped in behind her. The writing was still there, dozens of lines etched by a child's hand. "Dad will come back." Over and over. Some were scratched deep, as if dug into the wood with fingernails. Sarah stepped forward, touching the wall. "That was Ethan," she whispered. "I know it." Beneath the writing, half buried in debris, lay a small notebook. She knelt and lifted it carefully. The cover was soggy, torn, but inside, beneath smudges of water and dirt, there were pages, drawings, words, a child's journal. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the pages. The first drawing was simple, 2 stick figures beside a blue shape. The lake, presumably, one taller, with spiky hair, one smaller, holding a fishing rod. Labeled underneath in shaky handwriting, "Me and Dad at the lake." The next page showed a house with smoke curling from a chimney. Underneath, the new place. And then, words. "We sleep during the day now. Dad says it's safer. The man with the scar comes sometimes. He brings food but won't stay." Sarah's eyes darted to Mendez. "Did you read this?" He shook his head, stepping closer. "I didn't touch it." She turned another page. "I miss home. I miss Aunt Sarah. Dad says we can't leave yet. He says the radio doesn't work and the man with the scar is helping." The drawings got shakier, the spelling more erratic. And then, on the bottom of one torn page, a red smudge. Sarah stared at it. Not crayon? Mendez took out a flashlight and scanned the walls. "Look at that." In the far corner, nearly lost in shadow, something glinted. He stepped over carefully, crouched, and pulled back a loose board. A tin box. Rusted shut. Together, they forced it open. Inside were crumpled notes, tiny toys, and a photograph. Sarah picked it up with trembling fingers. It was Ethan. A little older than she remembered. Thin, smiling faintly, standing in front of this very cabin. Next to him, a man whose face had been burned halfway off the photo. She gasped. "That's not Thomas." "No," Mendez said, voice low. "It's not." A deep chill passed through the room. Sarah turned the photo over. In the corner, barely legible, "Fall 2016. She sank to her knees. "He was alive a whole year after they disappeared," she whispered. Mendez looked out through the cracked window, into the trees. His jaw clenched. "I'm calling this in." Sarah didn't stop him. She flipped to the final page of the journal. There were only 2 words written in the center in larger, shakier script. He lied. They hiked back slowly with Sarah clutching the journal like it would vanish if she let go. At the ranger station, Ellie Porter waited. Her face went pale as they recounted what they'd photo, the journal, the red smear, the name Ethan. "I'll contact forensics," she said. "We'll get the handwriting analyzed, the DNA, everything." But Sarah barely heard her. She was staring at the wall behind Ellie's desk. A map. Pinned to it was a marker, the location of the cabin. Just above it, another marker. Another structure? "What's that?" she asked. Ellie followed her gaze. "Oh, that's an old trapper's station, abandoned since the 70s. Nothing there but stone walls and rust." Sarah stepped forward. "That's only half a mile from the cabin." Ellie nodded. "Yeah, but it's empty." Sarah looked at Mendez. "No, it's not." That night she dreamed again. This time the cabin was gone. Only the dirt outline remained. In its place stood a small boy, barefoot, eyes wide. He held a torn page in one hand, and with the other he pointed, not to the forest, but to her. Sarah woke before dawn. The dream lingered in her chest like smoke. She dressed in silence, layered against the cold. Her hand shook as she tied her boots. The journal was in her bag, the photo in her coat. She didn't wait for backup. She drove to the edge of the trailhead and parked beside the ranger gate. No one else had arrived yet. The sun had not yet breached the horizon. Frost clung to the windshield. She stared out across the dark tree line. Somewhere behind it sat the truth. A station no one believed mattered. A half-mile from the place her nephew had etched desperate hope into wooden walls. She hiked fast, the forest whispering with each step. Her breath was sharp in her throat. The trail sloped downward, then cut right. The terrain matched the old maps. The trapper's station wasn't far now. When she reached it, the structure emerged slowly from behind a wall of ferns. Built from thick stone, almost sunken into the earth, the station looked more like a bunker than a shelter. The door was heavy, iron-rimmed, still shut, rusted shut. On the far side, partially collapsed under vines and soil, was a small window. She dropped to her knees. Brushed away the debris. It was cracked, but still intact. She pressed her face close to the glass, shielding the light from her flashlight with one hand. Inside, shadows. Then something caught her eye. A shoe. Child-sized? As Sarah recoiled, her pulse thudded in her neck. She grabbed a branch and jammed it under the window. Pushed. The glass gave way with a dull crack. She reached in and unlatched the inside. The hatch lifted with a groan. The air that escaped was stale, dead. She crawled in. Inside it was cold. Stone floor, damp walls, dusty blankets in a corner, a plastic crate, an old tin plate, empty food cans, and drawings pinned to the far wall with nails, childish scrawls of forests, lakes, a stick figure with a beard, a taller one with no face, and on the back wall, above all of it, a name written in large, slanted letters, Ethan Whittaker. She collapsed to the floor. He had been here, lived here, hidden here, alone or with someone. Footsteps above, no, outside. She froze. A shape moved at the door. She scrambled back toward the hatch, heart pounding, reached for her flashlight. It slipped from her grip and rolled into the shadows. The door creaked. A figure, tall, male, hooded. She couldn't see the face. The man stepped inside. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, but the words caught. Then she saw what he held. In his hand was the same beaded bracelet, the one she had. Another one? No, this one was broken, a piece missing. He looked down at her and said her name. The man standing in the doorway didn't speak right away. He just stood there, breathing heavily, the light from behind casting his face in shadow. Sarah remained frozen, her back against the stone wall, one hand braced behind her on the damp floor. Her eyes were locked on the bracelet in his hand, identical to the one found in the cabin, except this one was snapped, frayed in the middle, one bead missing. Then he said her name again. Not like a question, like a memory. Sarah. The voice hit her like wind off the lake. Rough, tired, familiar. Her lips moved before her brain caught up. Thomas? He didn't answer, not with words. He stepped forward into the faint light, and the shape of his face filled in, beard grown wild, hair grayer than it should have been, eyes sunken but His face was thinner, and a long scar now curved from his temple down to the line of his jaw. Her brother. Alive. Sarah didn't move. Her entire body locked in place. He stopped just a few feet from her. His eyes scanned her face, as if making sure she was real. "It's you," he whispered. "You came." She couldn't speak. Her heart was pounding too hard. Her fingers trembled, her mouth dry. "You're alive," she meant. He nodded, but slowly, painfully, as if every movement cost something. I didn't think I'd ever see anyone again." Her eyes filled, but her breath caught with something sharper than joy. "Where is Ethan?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Thomas looked down at the broken bracelet. His hands closed around it slowly. "I tried," he said. "I tried to keep him safe." Sarah stood, slowly. Her legs felt hollow. "Where is he, Thomas?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "There's a lot you don't know." She stared at him. "Then start talking." He sat on the stone ledge that had once held a heater, now rusted and lifeless. Sarah remained standing, arms crossed tight. "It wasn't supposed to go that way. We got to the lake early. Everything was fine. He was happy. We packed sandwiches, juice, his sketchbook. You remember how he always wanted to draw the trees?" She nodded, tears stinging. "We went out farther than we ever had before. There's this inlet way past the old trailheads. I found it years ago. No one goes there. Quiet. Perfect." He swallowed. And then the storm came. Fast. Hard. No warning. Wind flipped the canoe. I lost the radio, lost my footing. When I got to the shore, Ethan was screaming for me. He'd made it, but the woods, they were endless. He paused. The memory burned behind his eyes. I carried him for hours. We couldn't find the truck. It was like the storm had dropped us somewhere else entirely. Then I saw a man. Sarah's breath caught. The one with the scar. He had a gun, but he didn't aim it. He said his name was Ronan. Said he lived out here, off-grid. He offered shelter. Said he'd take us somewhere safe in the morning. "And you believed him?" she asked, voice shaking. "I didn't have a choice. Ethan was freezing. I had a dislocated shoulder. The wind was getting worse." He looked down at his hand. "We stayed the night in that trapper. Ronan made a fire, brought food from somewhere. Cans, mostly." Sarah moved close. "He left before dawn. Said he was going to find someone to help. Never came back." Thomas laughed once, bitterly. "We waited. Days turned to weeks. I left markers, flags, built a trail, But no one came. And then I got sick. Fever. Couldn't move. Ethan, he took care of me. That boy. He was braver than anyone I've ever known. Sarah's hands covered her mouth. But I couldn't protect him. Not after I passed out. She sat beside him. Tell me. When I woke up, he was gone. Left me a note. Said he was going to the cabin to find the drawing he left there. He wanted you to have it. He thought maybe someone would find it. Thomas's voice cracked. I never saw him again. Silence. Sarah shook her head. No, he was alive in that cabin, for months. I know. I found his journal. Thomas looked away. So did I. She grabbed his arm. So where did he go? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Sarah opened it slowly. It was Ethan's handwriting, but these words were new. He lied. The man with the scar never left. Sarah looked up, horror dawning. He took him, Thomas. That bastard took my son. Sarah's fingers tightened around the paper. Her eyes scanned the words again, hoping, praying, she had misread them. But there it was, clear as breath on glass. He lied. The man with the scar never left. Thomas looked older than he had minutes ago. The weight of those words sat on him like stone. I thought Ronan disappeared, he said. I thought he left us behind. I told myself 100 stories. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he was attacked. But none of them made sense. Ethan was gone and the cabin was empty when I got there. His bracelet. It was all that was left. Sarah stared at her brother. You didn't go to the police. I tried. But by the time I found my way back, months had passed. I looked like a ghost. No ID. No vehicle. And no one believed me. They thought I was unstable. A drifter. I was taken in for trespassing. No one made the connection. He leaned forward, voice thick with shame. I gave up. The words felt like a slap. You gave up? She whispered. He winced. I had nothing left. I didn't even know if Ethan was alive. I'd go back to the forest when I could. Try to follow leads. I found pieces. A shirt, an empty tin, more drawings. But Ronan was gone, like a Sarah stood. No. You should have come to me. I searched for both of you for 10 years. You were alive. You knew the truth. And you let me think you were both dead. He looked up at her. You're right. Silence stretched between them like wire. Then, quietly, Thomas reached into his coat again, pulled something out and placed it on the stone between them. It was a plastic dinosaur. One of Ethan's. Its tail was broken. Its eyes were painted unevenly, the way Ethan used to do. Sarah dropped to her knees, took the toy into her hands. I found that 2 years ago, Thomas said. Hidden under a floorboard in the second cabin. Ronan had been there. He must have moved Ethan between the locations. Her voice broke. You think he kept him? Thomas looked at her, and for the first time she saw the fear beneath the guilt. I think he raised him. The words hung in the air like smoke. No. Sarah's chest ached. No, Ethan would have come back. He would have found us. He would have remembered. Sarah's breath shook. I don't know, but you think Ronan still has him? Thomas stood slowly. I think someone does. They walked back to the motel in silence, the forest watching them with awe. At the motel, Mendez was waiting. He stood outside Sarah's door, hands in his jacket, eyes sharper than usual. You left before sunrise, he said. She held up the toy dinosaur. Thomas is alive. Mendez didn't blink. And Ethan? Mendez gestured for them to come inside. There's something you need to see, he said. He pulled out a folder, photos time-stamped 2 years ago. A surveillance image, blurry, low resolution, but clear enough. A young man, 17, maybe 18, slender, pale, wearing a hooded jacket, standing beside an older man. Ronan. This was taken in northern Minnesota, border town. The kid fits Ethan's age and build. No name, no ID, just pass through. Sarah stared at the boy. She zoomed in on the image. around his wrist, a beaded bracelet, broken, same as the one Ronan had. Thomas let out a sound between a sob and a "He's alive," Sarah's knees gave. "He's alive." They printed the photo. Sarah held it in her hands like it was fragile, like it might dissolve if she gripped it too hard. The boy in the image was thinner than she remembered, his face more angular. Eyes, they were the same, watchful, like Ethan had always been. She touched the outline of his face with her finger. Her chest ached in waves. "What town was this taken in?" she asked. Mendez checked the file. Cass Ridge, population under 200, off-grid community. Surveillance was from a gas station near the state line. No credit card use, no car trace. They disappeared into the woods after that, headed north. Sarah folded the photo, slid it into her coat. "I'm going." Thomas stepped forward. "We're going." Mendez raised a hand. "You need to think carefully. If he's alive, he's not the same boy you knew. 10 years with someone like Ronan. We don't know what he's been told, what he believes, how he sees the world now." Sarah stared at the photo. "I don't care. He's mine." The next morning they left before dawn. The road was long, cold, quiet. Miles of pine and gravel, frost biting the edges of the windows. Thomas drove. Sarah barely blinked. The photo never left her hand. At the gas station in Cass Ridge, the woman behind the counter remembered them. The older guy came through now and then, quiet, bought batteries, crackers, once asked about old trail cabins. She didn't remember the boy. They showed the photo anyway. She paused. "Actually, I might have seen him a couple months back. Came in alone once, bought a bottle of water and a map, didn't speak much, looked scared." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Did he say anything?" The woman nodded slowly. "Said he was looking for someone named Sarah." Thomas turned to her, eyes wide. The woman scratched her head. Seemed like he was trying to leave. Said the man he was with wasn't his real father. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. She reached for the counter. "Where did he go?" The woman pointed out the window, headed west, toward the old fire towers. They drove all day, reached the forest line by sunset. The trail was rough, nearly gone in places, but something about it felt familiar. Too familiar? That night Sarah dreamed again. The boy was older now, taller, but still Ethan. He stood in a clearing holding a piece of paper, the original drawing from 10 years ago. He looked up and his mouth moved. But no sound came out, only a shadow moving behind him. She woke, gasping. At dawn, they continued. Halfway up the trail they found it. Another cabin, newer, sturdier, recently abandoned. Inside, canned food, a mattress, old boots. A half-burned photo in the fire pit, the image of Sarah, Thomas, and Ethan torn down the middle. And on the wall, scrawled in charcoal, "Don't trust him." I remember now. Beneath it, the missing bead, the orange one from Ethan's bracelet. Sarah picked it up, closed her eyes, and exhaled like it was the first real breath she'd taken in 10 years. Mendez's voice came over the radio. "There's movement west of your position. 2 people, running." Sarah and Thomas burst through the door. Into the forest, toward the truth. Branches slapped at her arms as Sarah ran, feet pounding against uneven soil, breath ragged and sharp in her throat. Thomas was behind her, just far enough that she could hear the crack of twigs under his boots. The woods grew thicker the farther they went, pulling inward like a maze. The forest didn't want to give him up, but he was close. She could feel it. The trees opened slightly into a clearing, small, circular, half-shadowed by a canopy of pine. In the middle, 2 figures, one older, one young. Sarah stopped cold. The younger one turned. He was taller now, his face sharper, body wiry. But the eyes, it was him. Ethan. He froze, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. Thomas reached the clearing, skidding to a stop beside her, his voice cracked. "Ethan!" The older man stepped forward, placing himself between them. Ronan. He hadn't aged well. His skin was weathered, his clothes heavy with dirt and time. His face, still marked by that long scar, twisted into something unreadable. Sarah stepped forward. "Don't, Ronan." She stopped. Ethan looked between them, uncertain, wild-eyed. "I remember," he said. Ronan's eyes flicked toward him. "Ethan!" But the boy stepped around him. "I remember her." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "Ethan," she would. He nodded, slow, like he was trying to convince himself it was real. Then faster. "I thought you were dead." Her voice broke. "So did I." Ronan grabbed Ethan's arm. The boy pulled back. "No," Ethan said. "You said they never came. You said no one looked." Sarah stepped forward. "We never stopped." Ronan's face changed. No longer cold, just tired. He looked at Thomas. "You left him." Thomas didn't move. "You took him." "I saved him." Sarah raised her voice. "You stole him." "He was alone. I kept him alive." "By lying." Ethan looked at the man who had raised him, his body shaking. "You told me I didn't have a family." Ronan's hands opened, helpless. "You wouldn't have survived the truth." Ethan took a step toward Sarah, and Ronan reached for him. In that second, everything stopped. Sarah moved first, grabbing Ethan's wrist and pulling him close. Thomas lunged at Ronan, shoving him back. Ronan didn't fight. He just stood there, arms lowered. "It's over," Thomas said. Ronan didn't respond. Sarah held Ethan against her. Her heart thundered. Her hands trembled. She hadn't touched him in 10 years, but her body remembered everything. The shape of his shoulders, the way he leaned slightly to the right when he could. He was crying now. "I didn't know who I was," he whispered, "but I kept seeing your face, in dreams, in flashes. He told me they were fake." "They weren't," she said. "You were mine." "I wanted to find you. I didn't know how." "You did," she said. "You did." Behind them, Ronan sat down on a log, said nothing. The wind moved through the clearing like breath. Thomas stood nearby, watching the boy who was once his son cling to the sister who never gave up. He wiped his face and turned away. Ethan looked up. "Are you really my dad?" Thomas knelt beside him. "I am." "Why didn't you come sooner?" Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Later," she said. "You'll know everything, but not now." Ethan nodded, eyes closing. His body gave in. Sarah held him until the shaking stopped. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, though the sun had barely moved through the trees. Ronan remained on the log, unmoving, his hands resting palms up on his knees, like a man who had accepted something long before the others realized there was a decision to make. Thomas paced behind Sarah, not looking at the man, not speaking. Every few steps he ran a hand through his hair, or clenched his fists, or stared up at the sky like it held answers. Ethan hadn't let go of Sarah. He sat on the ground beside her, his head resting against her shoulder, like he was 7 again. Like the years in between had been stolen, and the body beside her wasn't 19 but 9. She held him without asking. Finally, Thomas broke the stillness. "You could have turned him in." Ronan didn't respond. "You could have taken him to a hospital, a ranger station, left a note. You had a dozen chances." Ronan blinked, but said nothing. "You knew his name." Still nothing. Thomas stepped closer. "You knew who he was, who I was, and you decided to bury him like a secret." Ronan's voice came out low, tired. "He wasn't a secret. You kept him. I raised him. You lied to him. I protected him." "No," Thomas said. "You kept him to fill something in you." Ronan looked up, eyes hollow. "There's nothing in me worth filling." Sarah's head turned. "You said you saved him." "I did. You told him I was dead." "I had to." "No," and she said, "You chose to." Ronan finally stood. He looked smaller now, not just in height, but in weight. Like the truth had carved something out of him that couldn't be replaced. "I didn't think he'd survive the truth." "He would have," Ethan said. "You were a child." But I wasn't yours, Silen. Ronan looked at Sarah. You want to punish me. No, she said. I want you to look at him and understand what you took. He turned to Ethan, who stood now beside Sarah, taller than her, but still trembling. I'm sorry, Ronan said. I thought I was doing the right thing. Ethan stared at him, then pointed at his own chest. You never said my name was Ethan, Ronan swallowed. You told me I was Eli. You were. But that's not who I am. No, Ronan admitted. It isn't. Ethan turned his back on him. Thomas stepped forward and held out a hand to his son. Ethan looked at it for a long moment, then took it. Ronan sat back down, said nothing else. Sarah turned to leave the clearing with them, but then stopped. Her eyes moved back toward the edge of the log where Ronan had been sitting, a notebook. Small, brown leather, weathered. She picked it up. The first page read, Only one thing. I kept everything. Inside the notebook were pages and pages of entries, some short, some rambling, most dated. Descriptions of Ethan's routines, illnesses, injuries, favorite foods, favorite dreams, songs he hummed. Drawings he made. None of it was evil. None of it was twisted. But all of it was wrong. Every note was soaked in justification. He cried tonight, asked about a woman named Sarah. I told him it was just a name from a dream. He keeps humming the same tune, says he remembers a lake. I said we never lived near one. Sometimes he talks in his sleep, says Dad, and wakes up crying. I don't correct him anymore. I just hold him. The pages became darker. I told him a story today. About a man who lost his son. He didn't know it was about me. He asked if I ever had a child. I said no. Then, he's growing stronger and more distant. I think he suspects me. I don't think I'll be able to keep him much longer. I should have left him at the cabin. And finally, there's no way out of this anymore. If he finds them first, I'll disappear. Sarah closed the notebook with shaking hands. He was preparing to run again, she said. Thomas looked down at Ethan. Ethan was staring at the horizon, at something distant, something that had always been calling him. They left the clearing slowly. Sarah walked beside Ethan, her hand brushing his now and then, like she still didn't quite believe she was allowed to touch him. Thomas followed just behind, his eyes never straying from his son. The walk back to the ranger outpost felt longer, heavier, even though their bodies moved more easily downhill. No one looked back. Halfway down the ridge, he stopped. Sarah turned to see him staring behind them into the dense green shadow where Ronan still sat. He didn't hurt me, Ethan said almost apologetically. I know, Sarah said, but he didn't love me right either. Thomas said nothing. He made me feel like I belonged, but only as long as I didn't ask who I really was. That's not love, Thomas said. That's a cage. Ethan nodded. I want to know who I am now. You will, Sarah said. We'll find it together. Back at the outpost, Deputy Ellie Porter waited. She took one look at Ethan, then at Thomas, then at Sarah. No words. Just a deep breath and a quiet. Welcome home. Ethan sat on the bench outside while the others talked inside. He didn't say much after that. The trees rustled behind the building, the clouds broke just slightly, and sunlight filtered through. Sarah brought him a bottle of water. He took it wordlessly. She didn't sit, just stood near him. You don't have to decide anything today, she said. He looked at her. But I do, don't I? He reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken bracelet. One bead missing. He held it out to her. She pulled the other from her coat, the one they found in the trapper's station. Together they pieced the two into a full circle. It didn't match perfectly, but it was enough. Sarah tied the bracelet around his wrist again. When Mendez asked what to do about Ronan, no one answered at first. Then Ethan spoke. He needs to be seen, but not by me. Mendez nodded. I'll call it in. They drove home the next day. Ethan sat in the back, staring out the window. At one point he spoke. I don't know how to be this version of me. Sarah turned around. "You don't have to be anything today, you just have to be." The road stretched in front of them, no longer silent, not exactly whole, but beginning. The first morning back was the hardest. Sarah sat in the kitchen, holding the same mug she'd used every day for the past 10 years. It had a small chip on the rim and a faded pine tree printed on the side, a souvenir from a trip she took with Thomas before Ethan was born. She hadn't used it since the search ended. But now, with the house no longer silent, it felt right. Ethan was upstairs, sleeping in his old room. She hadn't changed a thing, and yet the room felt too small for the young man he had become. The bed creaked when he shifted. The walls still held faded dinosaur stickers. There were hand-drawn stars on the ceiling. She had thought about removing them years ago, but something always stopped her. Now she was glad she hadn't. The stairs creaked. He appeared slowly, barefoot, arms crossed tightly around himself, like a boy unsure where to stand in a house he used to own. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound natural. He nodded, eyes still heavy with sleep. "I didn't dream last night," softly, sitting at the table. "It's the first time in years." She smiled, just barely. "I used to pray you were sleeping peacefully, somewhere." "I wasn't," he said, "but maybe now I can." Thomas stopped by an hour later. He didn't come inside right away. He stood on the porch, his hands trembling slightly, looking at the house as if it had grown teeth. Sarah opened the door, leaned against the frame. "He's awake," she said. Thomas swallowed, nodded. They didn't need to say more. When he stepped into the kitchen, Ethan stood slowly. The two stared at each other. Thomas looked older than ever. Ethan looked like a mirror without a frame. Then, slowly, the boy stepped forward and hugged him. No words, just the sound of breath breaking. Later, Sarah found herself standing in the yard, looking at the tree Ethan used to climb when he was small. It had grown wider, sturdier, branches stretching farther than before. She placed a hand on the bark. Ethan joined her. "You remember this tree?" she asked. "I used to fall out of it. You always caught me," she smiled. "I never caught you. You hit the ground every time." He grinned. "But you made it feel like I didn't." They sat in the grass beneath it. The breeze carried the scent of pine and old soil. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed. Life, ordinary and but everything had changed. "I don't know what I want to be," Ethan said. "You don't have to yet." "I think I want to draw again." Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out the folded copy of his old drawing, the one they found on the cabin wall. He stared at it. "It's bad," he said. "It's perfect," she replied. He folded it again gently and slid it into his pocket. Later that week, the story made national news. Boy missing for 10 years, found alive. But the truth was never that simple. Ronan was taken into custody quietly. There was no trial. He never fought the charges. Never asked for a lawyer. When questioned, he gave short answers. Never denied taking Ethan. Never defended what he did. He just kept repeating one thing: "I didn't know how to let go." Psychiatrists debated what to label him: trauma survivor, delusional recluse, savior complex, abductor, protector, monster, victim. Ethan didn't visit him, but he wrote him a letter. He never sent it. He burned it in the fireplace and watched the ashes spiral upward like smoke from a cabin roof. Some nights Sarah would hear the stairs creak and find Ethan in the kitchen, standing at the window, watching the dark outside like it might speak. She never interrupted him. She just stood beside him. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Once he said, "I feel like I lived a whole life I don't remember." She answered, "Maybe that life is what taught you how to survive this one." Thomas came by often. At first, Ethan barely looked him in the eyes. But slowly they began building things: a birdhouse, a shelf, a new fence, and one day a small wooden frame for a very old drawing. They hung it in the hallway just outside Ethan's door. 3 stick figures, a sun, a lake, No longer a memory? Now, a beginning. Spring came, then, sir. The town moved on, the forest kept its. But in one small house, on one quiet street, something started again. One morning, Sarah found Ethan sitting under the tree in the yard. "Do you think it's okay that I don't remember everything?" She sat beside him. "I think," she said, "that remembering isn't what matters most." He raised an eyebrow. "Then what does?" She smiled gently. "That you came home." They sat in the shade for a long time after. The wind moved through the leaves. The branches didn't shake. They welcomed him back. Not everything lost is gone forever. Sometimes it just finds its way back quieter.